Hello and welcome back to my tutorial where we're making an action RPG in GameMaker. In this video, we're going to take a look at doing doodads. Doodad is just kind of a generic term for any sort of placeable inside of a level that's not part of the tile map. Specifically, doodads usually have like a collider, and the player could walk behind them or in front of them. So a good example would be barrels or a tree. Something where like the top of the tree shouldn't have a collider. So in theory, the player could walk behind the sprite. So let's take a look at doing that and some of the ways that we can kind of establish and put some of our doodads in here. So we're going to need to load up some sprites. Now I am going to do a little bit of maintenance to my sprites. I'm going to make a few groups here. So I'm going to create a group called tile sets. I'm going to move my sprites in there. And then I'm going to make another group called Doodads. And this is where I'm going to put my sprites for my Doodads. So I'm going to right-click Doodads and create a new sprite. Now, I've already chopped some of the things from those tile maps into separate PNG files. So this will be the tree. So that we'll call this SPR tree. And so if I go to import and I bump over to the grassland alternate, I've already cut a tree out of there. And I'll talk about how we could do this, how we could chop some things out of there inside of GameMaker ourselves. I usually just use external graphics programs like GIMP or Photoshop to do this, just to make sure that I get the correct number of pixels. So here's our tree. Now, a few things that we want to think about for setting this up. So first off is the position that we consider to be the origin of the object. Now, we're going to have to be kind of consistent about this because this is going to control how our layering works. Basically, our code determining what's on top of what. So I'm going to pick the feet of the tree, I guess the roots. I say feet because that's going to be what we pick for like other objects. I do want to try to make sure I get it in the center here. So I'm going to pick bottom center, and I see that the X is 96. So I want to make sure that that stays at like 96. Just so that, you know, in terms of X and Y, it is in the center. And so this origin is going to be the point at which, if the player is in front of this point, they're considered to be in front of the tree. If the player is behind this point, they're considered to be behind the tree. So it is kind of important where you pick your origin to be. Then we're going to modify the collision mask. So the tree shouldn't have a collision mask. That's just like a box like this. I'm going to switch it over to ellipse. And I'm going to switch it to manual so I can manually decide how big my collider is going to be. And so I'm going to kind of aim this to be a little bit around the roots. So the tree is going to block the player in this sphere. So you cannot walk through that. And that should make sense. But the player could walk behind the tree because the collider shouldn't be up here. Really, it's only kind of the trunk of the tree that's going to be blocking the player, and potentially even like attacks. So decide how you want to set up your collider, and then this is going to be the collider in terms of blocking the player. It doesn't have to be in the center of this origin, just wherever we think it's going to make the most sense. So when we're happy with that, we can close it. And now we have our sprite for our tree. And I'm going to turn it into an object so that I can write some code to control its layer position. So I'm going to create a group here. Might as well start being organized. Called Doodads. And I'm going to create a new object inside of there called obj_tree. And it's going to use that tree sprite. The only thing that I really need is I can do this So if I want it to be a dynamic rendering, I would put this inside of step. In the player, we're going to put this inside of step. But since the tree doesn't move during gameplay, I'm going to just put it inside of create, because that technically will save us a little bit of performance. I do want to pick GML code, and I'm going to tell it to not ask again for this project. And this is the create step for setting the layer. And the code's really simple. It's just going to be depth. I'm sorry, I should be saying depth, not layer. Now, how depth works is negative depths appear in front of things that have larger number of depths. So the formula that works out is going to be depth equals negative y. And the idea is that, remember in GameMaker, that if I have a stage like this, and I have a tree, and my tree is here. Let's say that the origin of this, tree is right here, and let's just make, for the sake of argument, remember that this is 0, 0. And let's say our room is 2,000 units big. This position right here, let's just say, is a y value of 1,600. Now, if we have a player hiding behind the tree right here, let's put the player right here. So we have a player that's standing there. We want the tree to appear in front of the player, so the player is hidden by the tree. So the player's position, let's just say, is 1,500. And so what we want is this number effectively to be lower, because the camera is at, like, when we're looking down on the world, if, you know, we think that this is a series of, like, here's the world, it's a flat plane, you know, the player might be here, and you know, we want the tree to appear on top of the player in terms of transparency. The camera is sitting and watching the world from negative infinity, so lower numbers are going to appear on top of larger numbers. So as it is right now, the player would appear in front of the tree because the player has a lower number than the tree. So if we just set the depth to negative y position, it'll make the things that are closer to the bottom of the screen appear on top of the things above it. So that's what this code is doing. Now, we don't have a player object yet, and we will very, very shortly. Perhaps in the next video we'll get around to that. So let's place some trees in the world and actually see this work. So normally when we start placing things on the instances layer, and I'm going to bump that up a little bit higher. So switch to assets. Whenever I place things on here, I got to make sure I have the right layer selected. So if I want a tree here, you know, because this layer is on top of details, it appears above it. So it may eventually behoove us to have multiple layers of instances. Oh, I always got the right thing selected. So we'll put a tree. Now let's drag another tree on. But that tree is appearing on top of the other one, and we don't really want that. So what it's really doing is it's using this instance order to determine what order the trees are kind of stacking in. The ones closer to the bottom are drawn on top of others. But in reality, we don't care about that because we're just going to use the depth variable to control the stacking order. But let's watch what happens when I hit play. Because I'm dynamically generating the layer or the depth that these things are going to appear at, when I hit play, everything will sort itself out. We can see that it is appropriately determining the stacking order of these trees, despite the fact that in the editor they're not showing up correctly. But because we're running that script that's setting the depth on the tree, it's considering their Y position when we place them, and then setting the depth appropriately. Now, you may want to just adjust this manually so when you're editing your level, it looks appropriate and doesn't drive you nuts. Also, we may want to take off snap to grid because we don't need the trees snapped to a grid. This isn't, they can be a little bit more organic than that. So we can be as creative as we want in terms of placing trees down. As long as we have the right layer selected. And so we can actually have some trees occupying the world here to give the world a little bit more character than otherwise without the trees. And so if I really just want to kind of block off this section, notice that if you select it, it also will jump you to the correct instance. So when I go back to here, I can see which one's which. So I can eventually figure it out and correct the order, if we care about that. But remember, when we actually hit play, it'll kind of fix all this for us. So what I'm really trying to do is just block this off so that the player can't go that way. I just want to have an impassable forest to that side of the map. And hopefully that does a pretty good job of convincing the player they're not supposed to go there. And again, we don't need to really stress about this because when I hit play, it will sort all of that out. All the trees will stack appropriately correctly. So if we want to go through and add other doodads, we could add rocks. So we can, same kind of workflow. We create a new sprite. We import the sprite. And then we select our origin. So 32, so maybe right here is the point of blocking the player. I'll update the collider so that, maybe the player can somewhat walk behind this rock and they'll appear a little bit behind it if they do. Now, judging from the fact that I am going through and creating a lot of doodads, it does start to begin to think that I might need to make this a parent type of setup so that I don't have to because if I want to make any changes to this script for the doodad, I'm gonna have to change it in all of my doodads. So I think it would actually make most sense right now to go through and create a parent. So this will be called obj doodad parents. And I'm going to copy the code here, right-click, copy event out of the tree. I'm going to go to doodad parents, right-click, paste event, and then I'm going to just close this and make all of these parented to the doodad parent. And then I can delete this out. That way, if I make any changes to that script, all of my doodads will update accordingly. So the rock now can be placed inside of my world. Maybe I would use a rock over here to block off the player. And, you know, we'll see that this stacks correctly, hopefully. Oh, well, it's kind of hard to see down there. But it did. This rendered correctly. If I threw some random rock over here, it will figure it out. And that's like I said, that's the beauty of this system. We have like a little rock just sticking up there. Now, I would be careful about that because the players might think it's some kind of secret and try to interact with it and be really disappointed when it doesn't do anything. Because whenever you have a pattern and you break that pattern, players gravitate to that break in the pattern. So honestly, I really probably don't want my rock there. I'll just put a rock over here. And so you can go through and create as many doodads as you want. You could fill your level with different things and make it a little bit more exciting than what we originally had. You could even make doodads out of like flowers because, you know, if you have like a tall piece of grass or a tall piece of wheat, it might make sense to have that be a doodad because the player could walk behind it. Now, we might not put a collider on it so that the player doesn't get blocked by it. But, you know, we could play around with that once we start getting a player in here. Now, as far as creating doodads yourself, now these two doodads that I'm using, I've already kind of gone through and chopped that out. You could do it manually. If you just go to the doodads folder, and let's say we want to pick a barrel. So we pick sprites, then we do imports, and I'm going to pick this giant sprite map. And I think there's a few things that I may have wanted to turn into doodads. I thought there was a barrel. Well, you know what? We can just pick like one of these flowers. We could pick a gravestone. We could, you know, have a piece of wheat. There's another type of tree up there. But, you know, let's just pick, you know, a flower. Some little piece of grass here. So I'm going to go into Edit Image and zoom in on what I want. So maybe I want this plant because I might use it as grass, even though it like looks like it's going to be carrots, but it could be a grass. So I'm going to use the selection tool and I'm going to draw a box around what I want. And then there's an option under, I think, Edit, crop all frames to selection. And then that will crop us down to just that piece. So when I exit out of here, I can have a little piece of grass. Same thing once applies. I want to make sure I put my center in a place that makes sense. Now this, because I don't really want to collide with it, well, we have to have a collision mask, so we don't really get a lot of choice in that. But we can just make it not block the player. So we create this. We go back through the process of making the doodad. Object grass. Make sure we set the parent. And then we could place that inside of my level. So now on the instances level layer, I can start putting little grasses. And then if the player walks over these, they'll appear in front or behind of it appropriately. I would think if I were doing this a little bit more kind of like for a professional project, I think I'd have more varieties of grass so that there's tall grasses, small grasses, just so that's more than just these tiny little things. But for the sake of not sitting through making a fourth doodad, we'll just use those. And these will appear, again, correctly. So like if I put this object of grass right there, because we're calculating the depth dynamically, it will appear behind the tree in practice. And so that's going to cover our doodad creation. So in the next video, we're really going to start diving into getting some controls for a player, so that we can actually start exploring this world. And then we'll begin the process of moving, colliding with our trees and doodads, and then the process of transitioning off the stage edges. So decorate your world. You might want to maybe create an additional level. So maybe anticipate that we're going to have we will need another room to the right. We might need a cave. So if you get a chance in between this and the next video, try to design a few levels that we can string together. And with that, I will thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video where we start getting the player controls set up.